What does the real estate counsel want you to do when the seller calls you and says, I want to cancel the sale, I don't want to sell to the buyer anymore? Get legal advice. So you just, and all the time, I tell the agent, oh, I already told the seller that. I says, oh, please send that to me email so we have it in our file. And what do they always say to me? I don't have an email, I just told them. So I say, that means you didn't tell them. And they go, no, I did tell them. I says, no, that means you didn't tell them. So why did they not tell them if they just told them verbally? Because there's no proof, right? You need proof that you've told the buyer to get legal advice. Because that's one of the questions the counsel will look for when they're doing a complaint file, is if you have something in writing telling the seller that you told them to get legal advice. So you'd send a little email, Dear Bill, thanks for your phone call. Please get legal advice about this issue. Then you're covered, right? That's a very important thing to do. Then, so after you told the seller that, basically, so the mistake that some agents make is if they tell the seller this, you can't cancel the contract.
You can, if it's in the contract.
The seller.
The seller can.
By doing what?
Agreement from the buyer.
But mutual
Getting an
agreement
agreement.
or something.
Mutual agreement, yeah, that's the only way. But the seller can't, but I'm saying, some agents make the mistake of saying this to the seller, you can't cancel the contract. And is that a correct statement to make? No, it's not, because a lawyer might look at the contract and say, oh, they did initial on page 4, so the contract's dead, or whatever, something's wrong with this contract, it's not a valid contract. So that's why when we email you saying you did silly things in your contract, it's so vital, because sometimes the buyer or seller want to get out of it. So this is the one.
May I ask you, how would you say? How would you say? Like, the seller asks you, Glenn, can I cancel the contract?
So you need to get legal advice, and so if you want to cancel the contract, there's basically only one way we can do that, unless the lawyer tells you otherwise, and that is for the buyer to sign a release form. So I'm going to send you the release form. Does anyone here not know what the release form is? April, do you know what the release form is? No. So Megan's going to find it. So you just go into Dropbox, you type up here in the word release, and right there it is. Deposit release and collapse deal. It's exactly 4 million. So if the buyer and seller sign that form, you're good to go. Right? The problem is when the buyer likely won't want to cancel the sale. They're all excited. So if the buyer doesn't sign this form, you basically have got, the lawyer can solve the problem for them. Go to court, get a judge, whatever, right? It's not our problem. But if the buyer and seller sign this form, you can do it. So let's pretend the buyer doesn't want to sign it. What could the seller do to encourage the buyer to sign that form?
Go to the lawyer.
Write a check. Right? You write a check for 100, they'll sign the form. So just a matter of what you want to do to get the buyer and seller to cancel. Right? So that's an easy solution to the problem of it. So we should introduce some people who are new here. Thomas is from the Ladner office, so he's here.
Welcome,
Hi, Thomas.
Hi guys, ladies.
Thank you.
I know some of you from Vegas, so.
And who else is, everyone else is regular. Okay, so everyone else knows everybody. Okay, so that's canceling the contract. Okay, let's go back to email and see what else is there. What's this one? What should be on the bank draft? What should the name be on the bank draft? Is that correct? Remax City Realty? It's not correct. The real estate counsel wants to have the word in trust in there. So what you're supposed to do when you've got a buyer is you're supposed to text them, because I think most people take their phone to the bank, text them, get a bank draft, put down $20,000 payable to Remax City Realty and Trust, right? Because when they go to the bank and say, I need a bank draft, what's the first question the bank person asks them?
To who?
To who? And for how much? And so then they're calling you, Bill, how much? Glenn, how much is the bank draft for, right? So I've learned that now, because they have it in their text and they can see it very clearly. They never get the wrong amount, never to the wrong company, right? I had one realtor in Gibson's. What he wants is he says, I always tell them to look on page 1 of the contract. Well, I don't think many people take page 1 of the contract with them to the bank. But maybe if your customers are going to take you page 1 to the bank, then you don't have to text them. But otherwise, text them, then you never have a problem with the wrong name or the wrong amount on the check.
In the contract, it says, when it comes to deposit, it says, will be delivered interest to Remax City Realty and then Remax City Realty interest again?
Nope, just Remax City Realty.
Okay.
But I'm saying on the check itself, it's got to have the words Remax City Realty and Trust. That's what the Real Estate Council wants to see happen. So if people make the check wrong, like if people just make the check out to, oh, there's two chairs back there. So if the customer makes the check out to the wrong name, like if the customer just writes the word Remax on it, or Remax City, this type of thing, we'll still put it in a trust account, but just the Real Estate Council doesn't like that. So it'll still clear the account if it just has the word Remax on there. So, but try and send the right name, right? By text to them, then there's no problem. Okay, what's the next one? Remax City Realty, that's the correct term on the checks. Having the deposit paid so that we get our commission immediately and the seller gets the balance immediately. So could you do that? In other words, before completion, can you get your commission and can the seller get the money before completion? The answer is yes, you can do that, right? But you have to do some paperwork. So the first thing is seller getting the money. So seller can get the money before completion. A typical example that happens is that in a land assembly, completion's a year from now, sometimes even 2 years from now. Seller wants 100, 200,000 now. So you can get some of the deposit to go to the seller. So there's a special form you have to use, which April, you likely don't do that form either. So so you go to Dropbox, type in the word deposit, because you need something about deposit, and just go through these, and you'll see one that says, oops, it's wrong. Deposit not held by licensee is the correct firm. There it is, the form. Deposit held by someone who's not a licensee, in other words, the seller, right? So if this basically says to the buyer, don't do it, but if the buyer signs it, the bottom down here, then you're good to go, and the money can go from Remax to the seller before completion, right? So you can do that. Everyone just agree to that.
Good. Is it a good idea to have this form signed in case the seller wants to buy another property and needs the fund to do a down payment or a deposit for the other property?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's when it's used sometimes in that situation where it's a long completion. It can be used. So it's not that common, but sometimes it can be used. And the other thing is getting your commission. Pre-sales, that happens. You get your money before completion. So you technically get your money on subject removal if you wanted to. And you basically, our listing contracts right now say that you get paid your money at completion, right? So you could just do an addendum to the listing contract that says seller agrees the commission will be paid to Remax within 24 hours of final subject removal. And then we can pay the commission within 24 hours of final subject removal. So you can do that. Okay, next one. Okay, so this is the one. So if completion is today and possession is 2 months from now, because seller's a 2 month rent back, when does the buyer get the keys? So completion is tomorrow, which is Friday the 16th, and possession is May 16th. When does the buyer get the keys?
Well, maybe you can have one set.
Yes.
When does the buyer get the keys? When does they get the one set?
At completion.
No, possession day.
Possession day.
Possession day. So that's the problem that you face. If you want the buyer to get the keys on tomorrow, which is March 16th, you have to have possession March 16th. If you want the buyer to get the keys on May 16th, when the 2 month rent back is over, you do possession on May 16th. So make sure you understand what you're doing for possession, because possession is the day they get the keys.
Well, in completion, technically, buyer is landlord.
He's the owner of the property, yeah.
It's a landlord because they're renting, so it is entitled for at least one set of a key.
Well, on
And
possession.
access to.
On possession. That's
On
why we always
completion.
we typically do possession one day later. Like you do completion Thursday, possession Friday, get the keys on Friday. But if you want, if you do a 2 month rent back, because we've had the agents, if you do this, they do possession May 16th, and then the buyer wants the keys, and the seller says, no, possession's May 16th. So I'm telling you, possession is the day you get the keys. Same thing happens, you show up there, and the seller's got all the stuff there. And it's possession days, 12 noon, possession's on the contract, and the seller's got all the stuff. Does the buyer get the keys?
Yes.
The seller's got all the stuff.
Yes.
Yes, why they get the keys? That's possession, right? It's an issue, that's a different issue between why the seller is still there, some legal issues there, But the buyer's entitled to the keys on possession date of the contract. Whether or not the seller's there, it's not relevant. Whether the tenant's there, tenant promised to move out, tenant's still there, buyer still gets the keys, right? Because a lot of people, the agents hold on to the keys. Well, the seller's not out or the tenant's not out. No, buyer gets the keys, and they got to go from there. So remember that. Any questions about possession?
Is it better to do a rent back with like a normal possession and then a tenancy agreement?
Well, yeah, in my mind, that's the best way to do it, because there's some issues. If the tenant's on holidays and the hot water tank floods, you got some problems there because you don't have the keys and all these things. So it's better to do possession on the beginning of the tenancy and just do a normal rental, right? That's, in my mind, that's a mistake to do possession 2 months later. But a few agents do that, and there's problems. Okay, so next one. What is wrong with this statement? Oh, must be the subject line. What's the subject line? Oh, we talked about that one. Who was here late? Elio. That's the question our agent told me. All my buyers have used the same inspector for the past 4 years. He just laughs.
So I give 3.
That's right, exactly. What form to fill out first? We've had a few agents, you know, Megan goes to list, well, Megan, whoever's listing the property, goes and lists the property, and on the listing contract it says Bill Smith, and the title search says William Smith. So how did that problem happen, do you think? They didn't do a FinTrack before, like the first document when someone says, I want to buy, I want to sell, first thing you say to them is, I want your driver's license, please, or photo ID like your passport, right? Because when you get that and you look on there and say William, you're not going to write Bill on the listing contract or on the contract of purchase and sale, right? So, because it just embarrasses you to have to go back and get it initialed and all these things, right? So, the first document you need is the driver's license. You fill out the FinTrack form, you've got William written down, you're not going to write down Bill when you've already written down William and saw it on the guy's driver's license. So remember that, that's a very easy thing. It's also a commitment. When I give Mary my driver's license, I'm really committing to signing the paperwork. So that's, you know, I usually get up, go there, grab my driver's license, come back, give it to her. That's very much a commitment sign. So when people do that, they're committing to sign the paperwork with you. So always ask that question first. This next one. Okay. Yeah, so this is the question the agent said. I thought there's a form called deposit paid by someone else. It needs a FinTrack or something. I can't seem to find that form because the husband's a buyer and deposit paid by wife. Do you have to do anything special in that situation?
There's no name on the deposit. Receipt of funds.
The correct term is receipt of funds, because if someone other than the buyer on page 1 of the contract gives you money, you have to do receipt of funds. So April probably doesn't know that form either.
You have to think for that too, right?
That's what receipt of funds is.
Yeah.
So if you just type in the word receipt of funds, you spelled receipt wrong. Receipt of funds. This is the form you'd use to when someone other than the buyer on page 1 of the contract gives you money. So in other words, the wife. She's not on page 1. She gives you the money. You got to do a FinTrack form on her. It's a third-party transaction. So make sure that, because the FinTrack checks that.
So then you still need to give this receipt to the buyer who gave you a deposit regardless?
Well, this is nothing to do with that. What you're thinking of receipt, it's not that type of receipt. It's a government document saying where you got money from.
But the buyer gives you the deposit and the wife gave it to him. There's no name on the deposit.
Right, but I'm just saying that what FinTrack wants you to do is if someone gives you a check and it's not the buyer on page 1, you're supposed to fill out this form.
So it's a parent or something, they won't want that form filled out.
Yeah.
But receipt of fund is, we always fill it out.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If they are like the third party or the buyer.
Okay, well the minimum, you can do it, if you can do it for the buyer as well if you want, but you have to do it if it's someone other than the buyer. But you can do it just for regular ones as well. It's up to you.
Oh, so it is not necessary.
Not necessarily if the buyer's actually one giving you the money. Well, that's the next one. Okay, so someone gives, to see if the title search opens. So an agent sent me this thing, this title search, and there's the right-of-way, statutory right-of-way, right, on the document and a mortgage. So just go back to her question. Is there anything of concern with the attached title search? What's the statutory right-of-way on this title? So
That's very common.
it's very common. Yeah. So what do you do as a realtor when you're selling a detached home, not attached, but detached home, and you see a right-of-way on there? So you ask the seller's agent, or if you're the seller's agent, you put it on attachments, that right-of-way document, And actually, it's in my trash now. That's too bad. But let's see if it's here. I can't remember. The just wait 1 second. I'd like to show that to you.
Can the seller's agent refuse to order it?
They can, yeah. But so basically what you do is you get that document.
There should be like several documents. Yeah, and you can't order for no. Well, for condos, I understand. So you don't need to.
I don't see it quickly, so it doesn't matter. So what you do is you order that document from land titles, put in attachments, or you give it to the buyer. And then what's the buyer going to say when you give it to them?
What does it mean?
Exactly.
Exactly.
So the temptation is you don't want to pretend to be a lawyer and try and explain that document to them, right? So you simply say, you just talk to a lawyer and they'll explain to you what that means. Because it's too risky for you to try and explain a right-of-way to a buyer, right? It's just too risky. So you just say, just talk to a lawyer and they'll explain it to you. They don't want to take the risk of that.
If the seller doesn't have a document, what should they do?
Well, all documents are available from land titles, so it's just a matter of whether they can be ordered online. And a few really old, obscure documents, you have to actually go down in person, or you can order from a company called Dye & Durham, which costs about $7,500, and they actually walk into the land titles for you, get the document, and email it to you. So, Megan, we can order any document for you that's on title, and it's either a very fast $25 cost, or it's an expensive personal one by Dye & Durham. But that's very common. Like maybe once every 6 months, Dye & Durham has to walk across the street and get the paper document and email it to us. Very uncommon. They're all there. So here's a lady who is sending, says, so Phil's another real estate agent. So Phil's meeting my client because she's got the house for sale. So sorry, the buyer has written an offer to buy her listing. No, to buy a property. So she's the buyer's agent, and they've got to sell in Anmore. So Phil is the seller's agent in Anmore. She's the buyer's agent somewhere else. So this is the question. So Phil is meeting my client in Anmore to list the subdividable property. What form do I disclose to my client my referral fee? So do you know what she's talking about?
Something next on that.
So what happens is if you've got a client and you're going to make money from sending them to Phil, you have to disclose to your client that Phil's giving you money. So think about that. If you send a referral to Phil in Calgary, and Phil's going to send you money, and it's your client who's selling in Vancouver, you have to disclose to your client in Vancouver, because it's your client, I'm going to get 25% from your purchase in Calgary. To disclose that. Phil also has to disclose, because he's going to enter into a client relationship with that person, I'm going to send money to Vancouver, but that's a separate issue. But I'm saying for you, whenever you're making money off of a client, if you give them a mortgage broker and get $25 from every mortgage broker inspection, mortgage, you're supposed to disclose that to your client, that you're getting money from the mortgage broker or from the building inspector, whatever.
Disclosure of terms of trade?
No, that's if you're buying or selling. I'm just saying if you're going to make money from somebody off your client, you have to disclose to them. So in this case, you're making money from Phil. If you're making money from the mortgage broker, you have to disclose that to your client as well. Okay? Does everyone have any questions about that? Okay, next one. Okay. If a person has a rental house and they reside in it, then it has been a rental for many years, then he sells, does he need to pay capital gain? So that's an accounting question, so you don't want to answer that question. But just so you know what happens, because that's a very common thing that happens, the very simple thing is you pay tax on the time it's a rental, and the time it's not, it's free. Right? So if you're supposed to do an evaluation of the property, so you buy the property for $100,000, you rent it out for 2 years, it's now worth $300,000 and you live in it. So the profit from 100 to 300 is taxable, then you sell it for 500, you lived in it for 2 years, so the 300 to 500 is free, the 100 to 300 is taxable. That's the simple answer. But you just tell people, oh, that's a hard question to know the exact answer, you should talk to your accountant. That's what you say, right? Don't try and answer that question. And that's it. Okay, so now we have to go back to the very beginning one. So go in the, so I want to show the title search, this one here. Okay, so go to the title search. Go down. So on this title search, go down a little bit farther. Go down more. And right there. Under legal notations. Under legal notations, a little thing, it says, bylaw contravention known as community charter. When you see that, what does that mean? So let's go to the definition of a material latent defect. Not all of you got that memorized, what it is. So Megan's just going to Google that because you're not sure. I've told you you've read something about material latent defect. You can just Google it. Material latent defect. I'm teaching you how to find problems yourself, right? Material latent defect. There's the real estate council. You can't ask for anything better. So click on that. And just go down a little bit. So here are the four things that could be a material latent defect when you're selling real estate. And so this one down here, the third one says, a circumstance that affects the real estate in respect to which a local government has given a notice to the client or the licensee that the circumstance should be remedied. Right? So that means basically the city is sending a letter saying, you've got a problem that you've got to fix. So when they've got something, a bylaw notification registered on title, what do you think the city has done there? They've sent the guy like 10 letters. Trust me, if they've got to the point where it's on title, they sent the guy 10 registered letters. Because every time you go to the seller and say, oh, there's a bylaw contravention on your thing, what does that mean? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. They always say that because it's embarrassing to have that. Right? But that's a material latent defect to have a bylaw notice on your thing. A common one, I've had a couple of them, where it's cleanup notices. You know, if the backyard is like a hoarder lives in the backyard, the city can issue a cleanup notice. And that becomes a material latent defect. I had another one where the balcony was falling off and the landlord wouldn't fix it. So the tenant called the city. The city came in there and gave a work order so that the balcony had to be fixed because it wasn't safe. So that becomes a material latent defect because the city has a work order, so you've got to fix the balcony.
The stairs in front of the house.
Only if the city is, we're talking right now if the city is giving notice. If the city writes a letter saying you got to fix your stairs, then that becomes a material latent defect.
What about the stairs in front of the house?
What about?
Can I consider that being latent defect? Because it's dangerous? Honestly.
Well, that becomes, it's probably a patent defect, which we'll talk about in a second. But we're just talking about issues where the city has given a letter to them saying, take out your suite. That's happened a few times in Burnaby. You know, one of the classic cases, we just had that about a year and a half ago. A guy sold a brand new house in our office, and the seller said, find me a tenant. So he puts the address in the rental thing, and one of the neighbors called the city on him because they didn't want a tenant living in the house, right? So the buyer's all upset that the city's chased him down 2 days after he bought it. But, so that's an example of government chasing you down, right? So you have to disclose that. So what is the rule for material latent defect when you find out you've got one?
Yeah, that's disclosed.
So right down here is the rules. Just go down a little bit farther. So we'll just read what it says. The disclosure must be in writing and separate from any agreement on which the real estate services are provided. So a lot of realtors want to put it in page 4 or page 7 or page 10, but it can't be because it's got to be separate from any agreement under which the real estate happens. So it can't be on page 4 or page 6 or page 10. It's got to be on page 1 of 1. Right? Think about that, right? And a license is not required to disclose a known to a buyer if the seller has already disclosed it in writing to the buyer. For example, disclose the material latent defect on the property disclosure statement. So as a seller's agent, always get them to put it on the PDS because then your life is much simpler, right? Timing of the disclosure is critical. Written disclosure, okay, must be provided to the buyer before there's an accepted offer. So remember that. So you can't wait until subject removal time to tell them it's in legal suite or there's an order from the city, right? Before there's an accepted offer. This applies whether the PDS or some other documents to be used to disclose these defects. A licensee acting for the seller must ensure that the written disclosure of the was provided to the buyer prior to the acceptance of the offer. So it says acting for the seller. So whether you're the seller's agent or the buyer's agent, you have to make sure it happens. Right? So it also, if you do any rentals, does anyone here do rentals? It applies to rentals. So, you know, Jennifer, if Carson's renting, oh, who does rentals? Oh, there you are. So it applies to renting as well. So if you're renting out a place, if you all can do rentals, right? You all can find a tenant. You can't do anything after the tenant's found except for Carson. So the owner says, find a tenant for my basement suite, before the tenant signs a tenants agreement, you have to tell them in writing, this is an illegal basement suite, right? So it applies to tenants and buyers. So those are the rules. In writing, separate from the contract, before acceptance, right?
So in practice, let's say you're the seller, I'm the buyer. I make an offer on your property. It's open until tomorrow 12. You want to accept the offer. You have to send me the document so my buyer can have it, like stating there are material Latent defect.
Yep.
Once it's not processed, signed, I send it back to you, and then you can accept the offer.
Correct. So so to stop me from making a counter offer, that's where you're supposed to call the seller's agent and say, I'm putting an offer in on 4th Avenue, got a couple questions, what date does the seller want, whatever, and then the seller's agent is supposed to say, in attachments to PDS, make sure the buyer signs it because there's an illegal suite in the basement. Because they enclosed the garage without a permit. They built the deck without a permit, whatever they did, right? So always, as a seller's agent, put it on the PDS, put in attachments, you're good to go. Or else just write at page 1 of 1. Buyer's aware the garage was enclosed without permits. And then it's an attachment, buyer's agent can sign it, send it with the offer. Page 1 of 1. Right, so that's the in writing separate from the contract before acceptance, correct. So, did anyone read, before we go big and goes back to there, what are the other examples of material latent defects besides the city giving a notice to the owner?
Can you repeat those?
Deemed unfit to live.
Unfit to live in.
Oil tank.
So that's what, okay, so oil tank is technically not one, depends on the situation, but so oil tank is not specifically listed there. It could or could not be. So unfit to live in, what's another one that's on that list before we go and look at it? Does anyone else remember any? Grow up is sort of a gray area there. It's not. Okay, so let's go back to the list and we'll look. So the first one is dangerous or potentially dangerous to the occupants.
Can you give us an example?
Well, a realtor was just selling, he told me yesterday at Gibson's that he was selling a property and the tenant was saying that every time he touched things in the house he'd get a little bit of electrical shock. And he'd been telling the landlord that for quite a while. The landlord never did anything, so he got some guy in there and they found out that there was big problems with the electrical system. So that's, but potential danger to the occupants. Unfit for habitation, that's basically where the city issues non-occupancy. Like sometimes the city, they say that no one can live in the property. I forget what the term is called, but they post a note on the door that says no one can live here. So that would be that. Unfit for so those first two are pretty uncommon, but the next one's a very common one for you. Unfit for the purpose to which the party has acquired it, if the party has made this purpose known to the licensee or the licensee has otherwise become aware of this purpose. So if someone is, looking and they're telling you, I really want to buy this house because I want to have a little daycare in the basement, my wife can run a little daycare here, and so then you have to make sure, because that's their goal in life, is to husband to work and the wife to have a little daycare in the basement, that they can get a license from the city to put a daycare in the basement, because, likely 3/4 of the city, you can't put a legal daycare in the basement. So if the buyer decides to buy this house, and you think, chance of them getting a daycare that's pretty small, just tell them, they already told you they want to put a daycare in the basement. Other examples would be building a garage, using a property for a purpose other than like using a residential property and having a mechanic in the backyard, rezoning the property, they want to buy it and change its use, that type of thing. So if someone has told you what they want to use the property for and you're pretty sure that they can't use it for what they're buying it for, it becomes a material latent defect. Make sense? Unfit for the purpose for which the party has acquired it, if the party has made this purpose known to the licensee. Okay?
What about asbestos?
That could be the next one. A defect that would involve great expense to remedy. So that could be the grow up, the oil tank, and the asbestos. That's a grayer, doesn't really say that, but depends what you call a great expense to remedy. There's really no definition of that, but if there's a defect, and some people would consider oil tank, grow up, and asbestos a great expense remedy, then that's what it becomes. And then the bottom one is, this is the most common one realtors run into, is a lack of appropriate municipal building permits inspecting the real estate. Some people do work without permits. So the three most common things people need permits for, they don't get them, is electrical, plumbing, and building. So technically, if this light, if I'm going to replace that light up there, like an electrician could replace that light in like 15 minutes, right? But the city technically wants me to get an electrical permit to replace that light and have a qualified electrical person replace that light, because if he does it wrong, it could cause a fire type thing, right? But very few people actually, to replace one light, get a permit, but you're supposed to. But, you know, a lot of people run wires all over their house as well, which of course you're supposed to get an electrical permit for and don't get a permit. That's a much more serious issue than just replacing that light.
When you
So,
say light, hold on, when you say light,
not the bulb, the
Okay.
the metal light fixture.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you're attaching the wires, like you're changing the wires. You're attaching wires.
The four kinds of permits: electrical, plumbing, building, and
That's it, just those three. Those are the most common. There's all kinds of ones, but those are the common ones. So when you are dealing with a seller, or you're the buyer, and the property says completely renovated, you have to think, did they change electrical things in here that would require a permit? Because then you tell your buyer that, you know, no work was done without a permit. Same thing with plumbing, right? You know, you got the sink was here, and the realtor says, yeah, they moved the sink over here. Well, as soon as they moved the sink, they've done plumbing changes, so then they need a plumbing permit to move the sink from here to here, right? So plumbing permits, electrical permits, and building permits. It's interesting, the house I've got for sale right now, the stairs going up to the second level, you know the little slats? They're about this far apart, right? What does that tell you? No permit, because a kid could fall through there. There's seriously this, right? So if a kid can fall through it, you know the city would never pass that, right? The guy took down the railing and put up his own railing this far apart. He's got no kids, it doesn't matter to him, right? But that's obviously work done without a permit. So that's an example of building. The other one's common is decks. Like I was showing a property the other day, and the how they've got it is, I would say that the drop from here is down that far. Well, again, the city would never let a kid fall off that far, right? So there's always supposed to be a railing there, so that was work done without a permit. So when you see things like that, you know that they did work without a permit. So that's building examples. And a lot of times, sometimes when you go up into attics, you know, and you have to crunch down because the ceiling's too low, like, you know, the regular height on a ceiling is supposed to be 8 feet. So if the ceiling's not 8 feet, you know, it's not legal dwelling, right? So those types of things are the work done without a permit, the last one down there. And so when you're the seller's agent, oh, and so in stratas, what's a very common one in stratas besides what I've talked about? There's one more common one.
Take a wall down with no permits.
Take a wall down, and that's a good one, and there's one more that they often do. Laminate without strata approval, right? Lots of people put in laminate floors in their strata units without strata approval. So that becomes a material latent defect as well, because the strata can make them take it out and put down the underlay, because they often don't put the underlay down. So you always have to get permission from the strata to do, because the city doesn't require a permit to put down laminate floor, but the strata often does. So, and then people take down walls in houses and in stratas. I sold a property quite a few years ago, and the buyer came back and sued the seller because he had taken a support post out of the basement, so the floor sank and the doors wouldn't close. You know, that's how we knew there was a problem. Then he brought the engineer in and says, yeah, there's a post missing right here. The guy did that.
What do you have to send to strata? Like to change the floor?
Each strata is different, but typically you just write the property manager, say, I'd like to put laminate floors in, then they send you back a form, which is basically a promise from you to install underlay underneath the floor is what it is. Some limit how much laminate floor you can put in, but each strata does it differently. But usually it's a form you sign promising to do it. Good to go. So, so when you're the seller's agent and you see that the seller's telling you about how they moved the kitchen over here and how they put in new pot lights here, you know the chance of getting permits is very small. So then you just have them right on the thing. Pot lights put in without permit, kitchen sink moved without permit. You're good to go, right? Put that in the PDS.
I have a question going back to the changing the light fixtures. So you know how a lot of condos they have the little cap for the chandelier or light fixture above the dining area.
Mhm.
So if somebody changes that fixture because they're rewiring, they gotta rewire the new fixture. They technically need a permit for that.
Technically, yeah. Yeah, because give you an example of why. It's because in the older buildings that are like 1970 and earlier, they're wired with aluminum. So you can't buy a light